So it's a little bit different this for you. I mean, how did you come across this gig?
Well, I was approached by the production company. I think it might have partly been. You'd have to ask them that really. But one of the first things they said when they were talking to me about it was that they liked, where possible, to put real historical figures into the Marples and the Poirots to kind of root them in a time in history. And because it was set in the Caribbean, they thought it would be interesting to have our greatest literary estates come together in the form of Ian Fleming. He obviously had his golden eye out there, his house where he wrote all the James Bond books. So it might have come from that, of them thinking, we should put Ian Fleming in. Oh, Charlie Higson's written some James Bond books. He might be an interesting person to go to. No, I'm not quite sure why they did it, because I haven't particularly had a history of doing stuff like that. I was very pleased to be asked. It is such a sort of great British tradition.
Yeah,
doing a Christie.
Yeah, absolutely. Were you a bit daunted anyway, because one of the great writers dabbling around with her dialogue?
Not on that front. No, I mean, I think people go to Christie for the plots, for those very intricately worked out mysteries, and for the sort of sleight of hand of hiding things from you and how she pulls off those tricks, and the sort of characterisation of the dialogue is fairly sort of simple and is supplying a need. And I think that's possibly one of the reasons why Agatha Christie is still so popular and so successful. There is a simplicity to her writing, and I know that one of the reasons they're such big sellers worldwide is they're used for teaching English foreign students. Yes, they're texts that for years have been, people in China and wherever have used Christie as
a standard text, sort of.
Yes, as read Christie, because I think because they are each book is sort of a closed world with very rigid structures, and her vocabulary is fairly simple. It's not very broad, the vocabulary, and yes, she's not sort of going off on pages of purple prose and fine writing and poetry. It's all there to function the plot. So, a lot of Agatha Christie was always one of those sort of books that kids would read when they stopped reading children's books and they wanted to read adult books. Christie's one of the things they read. Sherlock Holmes, and in fact, traditionally James Bond always was. Particularly because there was, for boys, there was always a bit of sex in there, which you don't get in Agatha Christie.
No,
but you do get murder.
Yes, well, yes. I mean, that's close enough. Yeah. And so, how did you work Fleming in then? I mean, it's quite well done.
It was almost the starting point of the first discussion. Was it's set in the Caribbean? It would be nice if you could think of a way of putting Ian Fleming in there. And I thought, well, if you're going to put Ian Fleming in, it'd be good to get James Bond in there. And of course, he got the name James Bond from this American ornithologist who had written Birds of the West Indies. And it was, as the way he tells it, it was there on his bookshelf above his desk, and he looked up. He was looking for a very simple, blunt, straightforward name, James Bond. He thought, perfect. 2 one-syllable words. He was trying to get away from that awful English tradition of sort of upper-class, amateur detectives like Lord Peter Wimsey and people like that. So he wanted a sort of very blunt name, James Bond. So I thought, okay, let's put James Bond in there. And I thought, well, actually, if I could use it and make it something that's central to the plot. So I came up with the idea of James Bond doing this talk about birds in the hotel. Ian Fleming was very into his wildlife.
Oh,
he naturally, he loved it. He birds and fish mainly. He loved. He had his own little private beach beneath Goldeneye, the house with the coral reef, and he'd get up in the mornings and go snorkeling before breakfast.
Oh, how lovely.
And he made notes on. He was fascinated by the fish and the wildlife. So I thought, okay, we'll do this lecture. we'll have Ian Fleming there, who's going to meet Miss Marple. Have these two things come together, and there's James Bond. And my idea was, okay, we'll say that everybody who's there at the lecture has a firm alibi. They can't have gone off to kill someone because they were there watching James Bond give his very boring lecture on birds.